close the doors and get everyone seated. So I have the enviable, or not enviable, job of introducing someone who doesn't need any introduction yet again, Janet Woodcock, the director of CEDAR. Up till recently, she held 2 jobs, but she's always held 2 or 3 or 4 jobs at FDA, so this is not a surprise to anyone. She is going to talk a little bit about real-time review, a little bit about labeling, and anything she wants to talk about. So please, Janet, welcome, and thanks for all your hard work.
And the real-time review sitting here, so I'll try to be brief, but I want to bring up sort of a new subject, and this subject is generated by the work that Rick Pastor and his team have done in trying to streamline regulatory review, which is really some of the content of this panel. But really, right now, the regulatory programs around the world are using, if they're advanced enough, they're using a digital form of paper to do regulation. And so, just as we did long ago, we get PDFs instead of paper, so we don't get tractor trailers backing up to the loading dock anymore and loading, but we have a gateway, and we have this information comes through in the common technical document format or other type of formats to the FDA and must be processed. And so when you're talking about streamlining, you have to think of the enormous amount of effort that is put in on the site of clinical investigation, all the paperwork they have to submit, the industry and all the paperwork and data management they have to do throughout the development process, the IND process and so forth, and then the various regulatory agencies, all the work that they have to do. A lot of this is because we're dealing with digitized paper. Now, the real-time review project has the constraints that we can't move right now to a different way of doing things. But that doesn't mean we can't imagine that, and that's what I'd really like to talk about. So the real-time review is trying to remove some of these artificial barriers to moving quickly in cases where it's very important for patients, for the public, to move a new therapy along. So ordinarily, you'd have to wait a long time until this digital paper was prepared, right? And then it would be submitted, and then the process would unfold itself. And I think what you're going to hear and what the Oncology Center of Excellence has done is they get pre-submissions of some of the data and so forth, so those can be evaluated ahead of time. But I would like to say that probably now the time has come, and there's no better forum than, I think, the Friends of Cancer Research meeting to start talking about this, because they've been very innovative and they've pushed innovative proposals for a very long time, as well as the Oncology Center of Excellence, which is also pushing a lot of innovative proposals, that we really ought to think about digital technology in a different way. And we really ought to think about how can we streamline and actually utilize the digital age in order to most effectively regulate and most efficiently regulate. The Oncology Center of Excellence also initiated and is leading another project we're doing during the IND phase. And this is the following. So instead of, although right now because it's a pilot, they have to do it in addition to, but instead of writing up every adverse event in a paper format, turning it into a PDF, making a letter, sending it to the FDA submission, all right, companies in the pilot can submit the adverse event directly to our FAERS database, right? That way, all of them accumulate, and they can be analyzed by the analytical tools that conform to the FAERS database, that are intrinsic to that database. And the companies have to submit this in a format they can submit to the ERRORS database, the same format they submit around the world. So there's some intrinsic savings in that to start with. So those two examples, real-time review and the use of digitized, standardized data to submit into a database, are two examples of fully utilizing digital technology in order to actually streamline assessment. Now, the Transcelerate group, which is an industry consortium, has been doing a site registry, okay? And this site registry is for the clinical sites, and they can put all their information on there, including when they've had good clinical practice training. And then each company can go to that site and get the information they need, that website, and get the information they need about the site, rather than asking each clinical site for that information separately. Transcelerate has told me the sites have estimated they save thousands of hours annually of processing time just because of this. They also put the investigator CVs onto this website and their training and experience and so forth, so that all this is in a central place and other companies can use it. Right now this is just within Transcelerate, but probably within a year it will be made as a publicly available resource that people could access. Now, but at FDA though, if you want to add an investigator to a trial, the company has to have them sign a 1572 form if they're in the US. And then they must attach the CV, turn that into a PDF, attach a letter to it, send it as a submission to the IND. And we get thousands of these all the time. We just continual stream of these. But these come in as discrete, separate submissions. And so, again, like the adverse events to INDs, how are you going to process something like this? It's not in a form. It's not fully utilizing digital technology in a way that could be utilized. So in my mind, we could probably utilize the Transcelerate database if everybody decided to use a third-party asset that was set up. Save the sites, the clinical sites, a tremendous amount of information and time. Save the companies and save the regulatory agencies probably around the world, okay, who require this information to be submitted to them in different formats at different times and with different surrounding data and so forth. So if you really look at the clinical trial enterprise and drug development enterprise, clinical drug development enterprise embedded within that, you see that there's a vast amount of time spent on matters that are, I call them legacy approaches to how you actually get stuff done and how you exchange information. And most of this is not high return on investment information. Now, at some point, though, to the point of the real-time review, for critical drugs that are being developed, say for unmet medical needs, say in cancer or other areas, watching that database build, say as a trial is completed, may be very important to the FDA. We really don't have a very satisfactory way to share that information with the agency right now, other than sending a data set into the IND and so forth. Long ago, we discussed this whole proposal publicly. We called it Firebird, and we thought we could have a third party set up a repository that all this could be contained within, and then through permissions, this could all be managed. But we didn't have the cloud then, and we didn't have blockchain technology and other types of technologies that would really make everybody feel comfortable with the security of this information. So I have 45 seconds left, now 42 seconds. But as you discuss this real-time review pilot, and as you discuss other types of things that might be done, labeling is another one that really could be. One of the problems with labeling, even if we get new authorities and we can get labels done more effectively and update them, they're still incredibly laborious and clunky and reminiscent of paper process that goes through to actually change the label. Why do we do this now? Okay, why are we going to still do this in 2020? So my modest proposal is that we all get together and really think forward, and I commit to working on this, that we think how we can move to really enable the digital age to help clinical investigation and to streamline all these things and put our assets and our efforts and our people against things that really matter. So that's what I had to say, Ellen. That was very brief and my time is up. Okay, well that's what I have to say, is I think you could look at every single part of the regulated process and you could think about how we could probably do this a lot better. And kudos to the Oncology Center of Excellence for the pilots they've done on adverse events in clinical trials and in the real-time review. But many other things are hindered, such as labeling, updates, such as even manufacturing and so forth, by the inability to actually exchange data freely and to really take advantage of the digital age. We all too much rely on digital versions of paper. And this should not just pertain to the US. This is something we should take internationally, because another thing that hinders companies from putting all their efforts into their clinical development programs, okay, is they have to submit different things to all these different regulatory agencies all around the world because they have international programs. And the more we can move to standardized, digitized data, the better off we are going to all be, and the more efficient and effective we'll be in bringing innovations to patients. So thank you very much and good luck on the panel.
That's a great intro. We've heard a lot about the real-time oncology review pilot already today, and I think it's time to learn a little more in depth what everyone's talking about. You have the white paper, of course, in your folder. My name is Michael McCann. I'm with Provision Policy, and unlike your other moderators, I was not part of the working group. I'm just here as a consumer of the white paper, like most of the rest of you, for better or for worse. So we'll see how that works with my questions. I'm going to defer introducing the full panel until after our opening presentation, which can get everybody sort of grounded in what the experience is with this pilot project to date and some of the outlines of the thinking that's gone into the white paper. So I'm going to introduce Chi Liu, who is a team leader in the Office of Clinical Pharmacology and was part of the group who helped put together this pilot, and she's going to walk us through our introductory presentation. So.
Thank you, Mike. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really excited to be here today to share with you our experience related to the two OCE pilot programs, Real-Time Oncology Review, also known as RTOR, and Assessment Aid. So I'm sure everyone in this room is aware that this has been a really exciting time in the area of cancer research and anti-cancer drug development. This graph here shows the number of approvals by the FDA Office of Hematology and Oncology Products in the past 10 years. And as you can see from this graph, there's a trend of increasing number of approvals for both numerical entities and efficacy supplements. So the advances in anti-cancer drug development calls for innovation to improve regulatory efficiency. To meet this challenge, OCE was established in January 2017, authorized by the 21st Century Cures Act. And the mission of OCE is to achieve patient-centered regulatory decision through innovation and collaboration. So talking about collaborations, first let me acknowledge our collaborators. It takes a village to build and execute the pilot programs. And as you can see from here, there are many people from different offices across different centers at FDA who have contributed to these pilot programs. And also would like to thank our industry participants for their enthusiasm and flexibility. It has truly been a collaborative effort. And last but not least, would like to thank the patients and patient advocates. You're the ones who has always been encouraging and inspiring us to do a better job. So thank you, everyone. Here's the outline of my presentation today. I will first give you a brief introduction of the 2 pilots, and then show you a few pilot cases, discuss the feedback we received so far, and finally share our preliminary conclusions. Now let's look at the first pilot, real-time oncology review. This is the pilot review process which allows for early evaluation of data prior to the official application submission and also early interactive engagement between the FDA and the applicants. Currently, the R2 is implemented only for supplemental applications. However, we've already started dialogue with all internal and external stakeholders to see how we can move this forward for new drug applications. At this time, for application to be enrolled into the pilot, we'd like to start with drugs that are already participating in an expedited program, such as fast track or breakthrough designation. And also, we'd like to start with applications with straightforward study designs and endpoints that are easy to interpret. So currently, we'd like to exclude studies that are exclusively conducted outside the United States or submissions with CMC formulation change or companion diagnostics. However, flexibility can be exercised at the discretion of each review division. So why do we want to use R2? During our review experience, we've seen some problems. For example, lack of timely communication between the FDA and the applicants can lead to issues in submission, sometimes resulting in refusal to file. And the applications that are submitted to FDA are not always fit for purpose. Sometimes there might be a lot of unnecessary information in the reports, and sometimes there may not be enough information. So the goal of our tool is to enable early engagement between the FDA and applicant, and we also want to promote some of the review activities and identify some key regulatory issues prior to the official submission. And we would also like to explore a more effective review process while maintaining or even improving the quality of our review. So this diagram here shows us the proposed timeline for supplements under the R2 pilots. Although this reflects general timelines for the R2 pilots, each case can be flexible. The boxes under the lower half of this diagram are PDUFA-related activities that are also happening under R2, and the boxes on the upper half of the diagram represents R2-specific activities. So once the database is logged, So once the database is logged and top-line data become available, the applicants can ask for participation in the R2 pilots by sending requests to the FDA review divisions. And within 2 weeks, FDA is supposed to respond to the applicant on whether or not they can participate in this pilot program. If the response is positive, and then an initial R2 meeting will happen within another 2 weeks. During this meeting, the applicant and FDA will discuss the logistics of R2 and come up with a tentative submission plan. In this diagram, an early package submission for R2 is submitted about 7 to 10 weeks prior to the complete dossier submission. And in this early package, we'd like the sponsor to include complete STTM dataset, top-line efficacy and safety tables and figures, complete add-in datasets for key efficacy tables and figures, key results, analysis, datasets for other disciplines if applicable. We'd also like the sponsor to submit protocols and protocol amendments, statistical analysis plans, and DMC minutes. We'd also like the sponsor to submit SAS programs, proposed labeling, and case report forms. Although not showing on this diagram, but under the R2 pilots, there are frequent standing meetings between the FDA and the applicants to facilitate timely communication. In addition, as Gita mentioned during the OCE launch conversation, OCE is also trying to improve review efficiency by data standardization and analysis automation. And there's a newly formed safety analytical team, which has been an important part for the R2 pilots as well. So for some of the analysis that used to take us maybe weeks, now it can be done by the safety analytical team in a matter of days or even hours. So by left-shifting the timeline, front-loading the review activity, and a more efficient review process, very likely the regulatory action can be taken prior to the PDUFA due date. However, the exact date will be decided by the review team, case by case. Now let's look at the second pilot, assessment aid. This is a voluntary submission from the applicant to facilitate FDA's assessment of the NDA and BLA submissions. It is developed based on the FDA multidisciplinary review document, also known as UNI-Review. This is a document that summarizes the FDA's regulatory critical thinking on all the regulatory key issues such as approvability and labeling recommendation. So for most issues, the sections are divided into two parts, the applicant's possession and FDA's assessment. And as you can see from this example here, the applicant's possession is going to be completed by the applicant, and FDA will ledger in our assessment into the same document. In the FDA's assessment, we're going to focus on whether or not we agree with the applicant, as well as what are our additional findings. So once completed, this document will serve as an FDA review, which also incorporated a voice from the applicant. So why do we want to use assessment aid? We think the FDA review should focus on assessment which reflects our critical thinking rather than repeating the applicant's analysis and statement. In addition, we think the separation of the applicant's possessions and FDA's assessment clarifies the ownership of each statement, as well as the agreement and disagreement between the applicant and FDA. Therefore, by using assessment aid, we think we can improve both the review efficiency as well as the clarity and quality of the review. So, unlike our tool, assessment aid can be used both for supplemental applications and numerical entities. It can be used alone or together with the R2 pilots. So the template is sent to the applicant during the IND stage, usually around the time of pre-NDA or pre-BLA meeting. And then the applicants fill in their possessions and send back the document around the time of the NDA or BLA application. Then the FDA review team adds our assessment into the same document during our review. So now we understand the basic concept of the two pilot programs. Let's look at a few pilot cases. So far, there are 3 applications approved under the R2 and Assessment Aid pilot programs. Among the 3 of them, ribociclib is an application for a new indication. Pembrolizumab is an application to convert from accelerated approval to full approval. And for carfilzomib, it is an application to add a new dosing regimen. And as you can see from this table here, by left-shifting the timeline and utilizing a more efficient review process, all the approval actions were taken ahead of the PDUFA due date. And among the 3 of them, ribociclib was the first approval under the 2 pilot programs, so I'm going to talk about this case in a little bit more detail. So in January this year, the Novartis Mona Lisa 3 trial, the database was locked, and the company made a decision to file an application based on both Mona Lisa 3 and Mona Lisa 7 trial together for 2 different indications. So in April this year, Novartis notified FDA that Mona Lisa 3 trial had produced result. Shortly after that, FDA contacted Novartis to invite them to participate in the 2 pilot programs, and the company accepted invitation. So on April 30th, the company submitted the first batch of data to FDA, and both the company and FDA were using the same template, assessment aid for data submission and evaluation. On June 2nd, our FDA Commissioner, Dr. Scott Gottlieb, announced the 2 pilots during the ASCO annual meeting. On June 28th, the full application was submitted by Novartis to FDA. About 3 weeks later, on July 18th, FDA officially accepted application under priority review program, and we approved the application on the same day, beating the PDUFA due date by more than 5 months. So while we were conducting those pilots, we've been selecting feedback as we go. Survey has been conducted with all the review teams, and post-action feedback meetings were held with the applicants. So far, we have received a lot of valuable input. For example, early engagement between the FDA and the applicants has been identified key to success. This is because the applicants will need to change the preparation order for different parts of the application. In addition, clear communication has also been identified as very important for the success. This includes both FDA internal communication regarding expectations and timelines, as well as communication between the FDA and the applicants, especially in regard to what type of information is needed and when. So finally, let me share with you our preliminary conclusions at this time. We find both the R2 and assessment pilot programs can be used to improve the review efficiency while maintaining or even improving the quality of our review. Both pilots helped expedite patient access to new treatment options, which is our ultimate goal. We find early engagement and clear communication are critical for the success of the program. Again, I want to emphasize these are our preliminary conclusions. We're still conducting more pilots and we're seeking feedback from all of you, which is exactly the purpose of our discussion today. So for more information regarding the 2 pilots, please check out the OCE website. And also one more thing, the ribocyclic review, which was the first approval under both pilots, is now available on the FDA website, Drugs and FDA, so please feel free to take a look at that and give us your feedback. So this is the end of my presentation. Thank you for your attention and look forward to a productive discussion.
All right, so we have an interesting topic to cover here, looking at review improvements that are actively underway at FDA and some case studies on real reviews that have been conducted. What I hope to do with our time on the panel is start and really follow some of the outline of the white paper. Start by working with the individuals on the panel who were participating in those initial pilots, and we're lucky to have 2 of the sponsors, the first 2 who participated, represented here, as well as one of the primary reviewers involved. And then also broaden out to some of the other stakeholders who participate in the working group and white paper for their reflections. And then in the second phase of the discussion, talk about where I think the white paper is pointing to on the RTOR pilot in particular, of a framework for thinking about expanding beyond this small subset of applications. At the same time, I think we want to talk through the attractiveness of the assessment aid and ways maybe that could be, at least there could be broader uptake encouraged, might be the way we could put that one. And then finally, in the sort of closing phase, I hope we can get into the kind of broader thoughts about where this all takes us and what does a successful real-time review mean. Some of the themes that maybe Dr. Woodcock was introducing that we're really thinking about, broader reinvention of what reviews are and how they work. And we can open up into what we really mean here. What is success in this scheme that we're talking about? So let me briefly introduce each of our panelists. Their bios, of course, are all available to you. I guess I'll start at the far end and just work my way back. Giuseppe Randazzo is the acting director of the Office of New Drug Products in the Office of Pharmaceutical Quality. So not the clinical review side, but the manufacturing quality control side at FDA. And I think we'll have some interesting perspectives on challenges of expanding beyond the comfort zone of some of the clinical reviews here. Let's see, who's next? I'm going to find on my whole list here. Jennifer Gao is a medical oncologist who was the lead reviewer in one of the applications, as you'll hear, in OHOP, as we lovingly refer to it here. Next to her is Karen Jones of Genentech, a vice president, and whose title includes the head of the Faster Filings Office, which is a really cool title. As you've heard, Genentech was not, at least not yet, a participant in these pilots, but I think can bring some interesting perspectives on what industry would see as potential opportunities or challenges in getting involved. We then have our 2 industry speakers who did participate in the pilot. Jitin Rana from Novartis is the Global Program Regulatory Director and Regulatory Affairs Group there, and was involved in one of the 2 applications. Next to him is Jonathan Chang from Merck, who is the VP and Oncology Therapeutic Area Head, and the other sponsor with experience in these pilots. Last but not least, we have Katherine Couvillon, who's our patient advocate. And I thought the best way to start a panel when you have a patient advocate present is to start with them and really ask Katherine to start us off with explaining to the group what you see as the reasons for being part of this working group. What's the interest and the importance of patients of real-time review in oncology? And we look forward to hearing your comments.
Thanks, Mike. When Ryan approached me about being on this panel and part of this working group, I felt like it was a perfect fit for me because I most recently worked for 10 years as a healthcare data analyst, and a large part of my job was evaluating, collecting, and submitting data for regulatory agencies. So I knew firsthand all the pains involved with that, and the idea that you could be involved with that agency that you're submitting to as you're developing what you're going to submit, I thought was a genius idea. It would eliminate all the confusion that we felt over what do they really mean by this information they're requesting from us. It would be more efficient because I wouldn't have to do all this work and then turn around and do it all over again. And I thought, I wish it could expand into all the areas that I used to work in. But as a patient, I was also thrilled to hear that this was being explored. In 2015, I was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer. And my oncologist gave me one treatment recommendation, and that was actually a breakthrough therapy that had just been approved about 4 months before my diagnosis. And thanks to that breakthrough therapy, I have now been on one drug for 3 years, which is beyond the average life expectancy of a patient with stage 4 breast cancer. So that is thanks to that. I can personally attest to the fact that the sooner drugs become available, the more patients' lives are extended, and the hope continues that we'll be able to live to see an actual cure. As you may be familiar with, in order to take certain drugs, you have to have not taken other drugs. So there's a lot of strategy involved for patients as to which drug to try next. So the difference of even 1 month could mean the difference between getting the newest, most promising drug and beginning a drug that may eventually make you ineligible for that newer, more promising drug. So I wholeheartedly support any efforts to get drugs that have been proven to be effective to market as soon as possible. The next drug that you guys might approve might be the drug that I need or one of my friends might need. So that's why it's important for patients.
Great. Well, thank you. That's a fantastic mission statement, I think, for the whole panel and to think about as we get into next steps as well. I really resonates with that message of 1 month can make a huge difference to patients, and we're used to. I was struck in G's presentation seeing timelines of FDA action response where I'm used to assuming that the numbers are months or maybe years and then having, oh, those are weeks. So that's impressive already to see timelines where there's decisions being made in a matter of 2-week timeframes, which is great. Not to say there isn't always room for improvement. I want to invite some of the panelists who participate in those pilots to flesh out a bit of what we heard. Maybe I actually would start the way pretty question. Maybe it's to Chi, or maybe we'll find another respondent who can talk. You touched on it in your talk, but what, from FDA's perspective, what was the real impetus to get into this real-time oncology review pilot?
So for this question, I suggest we ask the chief architect for our two pilots.
It's a trap. So Rick,
Yeah.
Rick Pazder came up and moderated a panel before, so I thought it was only fair that we trick him into being on this panel. But if we have a microphone and you wanted to comment on what, from your standpoint, the goal here was of starting this pilot. This is a self-initiated FDA pilot. It's not something that the agency is directed to do, or that I'm aware of, at least. He doesn't have a microphone. You can come up to the podium and take over as moderator. That's a good sign.
Well, I was just sitting at my desk and I just thought about this. It was like, well, I always tell people, I think this is one of the things that I've emphasized to all of our review staff, to think about things that you could do to make your job easier and better, okay? And I had thought about, our processes, because we were moving things and discussing things earlier. We have application orientation meetings, which we started, 20 years ago on OHA, but greater interaction with the sponsors. And this was kind of a logical extension of this. Why can't they start looking at the data, or why can't we get the data while the company is spending laborious efforts at getting all of their reports together, having every vice president in the company sign off on them, I take it, before they submit it to the FDA, and it just seemed like a logical thing to do. Also, it's not only speed, that's obviously an inherent issue here, but that's really a secondary issue here, but it's also looking at, is the data package sufficient to support an application? No company wants to have a refuse to file, that's for sure. And by looking at this data before it's even submitted, we could simply call up the company and say, look, you got problems here with this data package. We cannot analyze it. Rather than submitting it and having arguments with us regarding whether this should be filed or not, let's just have that discussion up front. So, I think that's one of the part and parcel of this also.
Well, you have the microphone.
Yes.
I remember a couple of years back, at least it was now, asking you about rolling NDAs and rolling BLAs. And at the time, your response suggested to me that you weren't sure there was a lot of value in getting bits and pieces.
True.
How do you see this as different?
Because really, at that time, with a rolling submission, okay, usually the components other than the clinical are done, okay, before the clinical portion is completed. No reviewer wants to spend months looking at a clinical pharmacology application and writing it up, etc., only to find that the application will not be submitted because the clinical trials failed. And that was one of the great limiting steps behind rolling reviews. It was, we have to wait for the clinical portion because somebody's going to be spending months of their time reviewing this application, and if that clinical trial is not positive, then that effort was for naught, basically, and we simply don't have the manpower to justify wasting people's time to do applications that are not going to even be submitted.
Well, I'm glad we got to turn the tables on you a little bit there for a second. Now I would like to hear from the panel on the podium, and I guess I'll start maybe with Jonathan and Jitin, our two industry representatives, and maybe Jonathan first, just to hear from you both. What was your experience with the pilot like? How did you get involved? How difficult was it internally to make it happen? And tell us your story, I guess. Jonathan first.
As was mentioned, can you hear my mic on?
Yeah.
It is? Okay, thank you. So as was mentioned, when we are invited by Dr. Kastner's desk to participate in this pilot program, and with the stated goal of trying to provide an important treatment earlier, we were all in. Obviously, that is a great opportunity to have a better dialogue and conversation to improve the efficiency of our applications. Another great aspect of this, and that's. And then finally, to help the reviewers understand the data package and to help us be more streamlined and improve efficiency on our end as well. So all of these were good. So as was mentioned, we had a accelerated approval in first line lung cancer, pembrolizumab with platinum and Trexate, and a Keynote 189 was the confirmatory trial. And when survival data was shown, we did suggest that, or we did accept the offer to participate in RTOR. And so that was interesting because what was asked is to provide data sets, many aspects of it, but predominantly the data sets, the SDTM, the added data sets, right? And rather than do it in a few months like we normally do, we were asking our statistical group to do it in a few weeks. And so, first they said, excuse me, and then they said, yes, this is the opportunity. And, then, so the compression up front to provide data sets so that the FDA can review it was done. And, we went all in and tried to do everything we can to help that review process. And so I think ultimately at a high level, it was a very valuable experience. I think the success can be both the journey and the destination, and the journey as to the interactions and then understanding what the important aspects of the application are, and the constant communication is very, very helpful to know that it can be done. Things that we weren't quite sure were doable or how hard it was to do was able to be done in a relatively, it's never painless, but relatively efficient mindset where we know we can do it now. And of course, providing it to having it approved earlier than the PDUFA date is also important. We look forward to being able to do better and to provide more information that is efficient for both the reviewer and for our processes. I don't know that we were able to accelerate the PDUFA date as much as our colleagues at Novartis were, but again, we do appreciate the feedback as to areas that we can improve this RTO or pilot. I think this is, from us, a very valuable experience, not only what we can do, but the fact that we were able to do it, in a way that is able to provide, treatment options to patients with cancer.
Thanks. I definitely echo what Dr. Chang here has outlined from the Merck standpoint. I think we were also at Novartis approached to participate in this program. We had discussed with the agency regarding the outcome of our trial, as Dr. Lee went through, and we were, of course, looking forward to participating. We essentially went into the call not knowing exactly what RTO meant, what it was going to entail. We received the outline that was posted on the website the day of our approval. But we received a version of that essentially right before the meeting started. So we went through that with our team. And I think that the consensus amongst everybody, including all the VPs in the company, was that we need to move forward. Especially if we're being asked to participate, it clearly shows that the benefit was there for our programs, as well as the benefit for the patient was going to be there at the end of the tunnel. So we went in wholeheartedly, understanding that it was going to be difficult for our team to change the way that we set up our submission processes. We also put together our submissions in a package that would typically be submitted worldwide. So all of our processes and all of the information that we put together is in a fashion that we can go step by step. Usually, many times it's the FDA first, and we move on depending on the timeline. So keeping that in mind, we were very fortunate to understand that the RTO was very flexible. So our data set submissions, something that typically we wouldn't submit up front, like we were asked to, and the way that we were submitting them was very different. I think it really showed the great collaboration between the FDA as well as the sponsors, and it was very innovative from both the FDA side as well as the sponsor side. We had to come up with new ways to submit. We had to understand what the regulatory implications would be in terms of even from an operational perspective, how do we submit. That was a lot of questions were asked. We received great feedback from the agency, so I think overall it was a very favorable experience. Definitely challenging and very intense was the word that we used at one of our calls. But yeah.
Were you ready for approval on the day you actually submitted the application?
So that was a very interesting. We had obviously we had a few calls leading up to that. So as Dr. Chi went through, we had standing calls with the agency, and we had an idea of where the review was heading. But to understand, basically a few days before that we were going to get the approval, that week, it caught us both. I wouldn't say off guard, but I think we were generally surprised that it was moving forward so quickly. But I think our review and the quickness and speed that we were responding to questions, I think really helped accelerate the overall process.
Right, and then Jennifer, you were the reviewer on that application, one of the reviewers on the team. What was your experience like? Were you, when did you get involved in this as a pilot, and how did the experience go from the standpoint of the review team?
Yeah, so I was the primary clinical reviewer on the ribociclib application, and when I was approached by Rick and Julie and Molly to participate in this, I said, I'm not quite sure what it is either, but absolutely I'm very interested, especially because I've been at the agency about 2 years now, and one of the things I've learned is a lot of these drugs, especially with breakthrough designation, we hear about the exciting top-line data results, and then at some point down the road, as the company is preparing its dossier, we get a submission. And one of the questions that had also always been on my mind is, well, instead of doing this in series, the company prepares everything and then we get it and we start our review afterwards. Is there a role for doing this in parallel, which is what RTOR really allowed for? I was also part of the assessment aid pilot, and as she mentioned, the FDA review is available, and I thought that really did help not only streamline and improve the efficiency of our review, but also helped us to focus in on the key issues and really provide both the company's perspective, but also our additional analyses in areas where we agreed, disagreed, or had additional information. So I think, as we've heard from some of the prelim survey results that she has mentioned, it has been a very rewarding experience, and I'm excited to see where this could go.
Great. And as we open up into that, are there, and I don't know if FDA is allowed to disclose this, I know there's been 3 applications approved under the pilot. Are there other pilot, other RTOR participants involved? Obviously, you couldn't identify them, but there are.
Absolutely.
Okay. So there are more ongoing and more lessons to be learned, I'm sure. I would just ask, maybe from the Novartis perspective, on the assessment aid piece, how did that look to you as a sponsor? Was it obvious to you that it was helping the review? Was it something that you did and were curious how it played out? Or?
Yeah, I mean, our assessment aid essentially mirrored some of the documents that we were already creating for our submission package. So we were fairly advanced in the preparation of that information, so we were able to inform on the assessment aid. Obviously, it was great that we also received some feedback from the agency once we submitted it. I think that helped us refine the message and the information that we included, and overall led to, I believe, the feedback that we got, at least from that day, was that it was a fairly well-written document. So I believe, the overall experience was, I wouldn't say, it essentially just added another document to our plate, but beyond that, we were able to ensure that the information or messaging that we were putting within our submission documents were translated appropriately into the assessment aid and would be clear for the FDA to understand and make their assessment a bit straightforward, a bit easier is what we received. More critical thinking was able to be done by the agency.
Great. And then I guess the question then has been put to the group and is outlined in the white paper is, where do we go from here? There's been some case studies, as you heard up front, at least for the RTOR pilot. It's great how quickly we pick up new acronyms. I never heard of art, now use it like I know what I mean. It's limited initially to, I guess, the most simple, straightforward supplemental filing, where it's clinical data with well-understood endpoints and a relatively straightforward design. I'd invite you all to refer to the white paper for some of the thinking about ways it could be expanded. The assessment aid, and she correct me if I'm wrong, but that's more broadly available already, correct? Essentially, any breakthrough oncology application could choose to use it?
Any application can use it.
Any application, period, for oncology could use it already. Okay. And then I guess I want to start by just asking the panel, maybe I'll put Karen on the spot first, and she hasn't had a chance yet, to just reflect on what you've heard and learned about the pilot. And as you think about it, are there things that you see immediately say, oh, we've got to move forward with this, and Genentech should get involved in everything? Are there potential drawbacks, questions, concerns, or issues you would have before we rush into expanding it to every possible application?
Just a small question.
Just a small one to start us out.
Well, I'll start and then maybe some colleagues can jump in. I don't think as we listen to the feedback from the pilot already, I don't think there's anything immediately that jumps out as being something that says we need to put the brakes on. I'd rather say, actually, no, this is the time to expand it. How many applications do we need to practice with before we think about expanding it? And the reason I think we should expand it really sooner rather than later is because when we think about how RTOR came into being, and it's really on the back of breakthrough designation. The idea of breakthrough designation was founded in one of the previous meetings that Friends of Cancer Research put out there. But it was really about trying to get products to patients faster, doing it more efficiently, making sure that we really gave patients every opportunity. And it was all hands on deck, and industry as well as FDA agreed on that. And we all set about doing that. And I think breakthrough designation has been such a success and created so many opportunities really for patients to get access to drugs quicker. That, you know, the more that we can do this, and the sooner we can do it, the better we'll all be. And I think the real question is, you know, what's the risk in the sense of FDA still has to accept a dossier and still has the entire time in which to review the dossier. So we're really playing in a space that actually there's all an upside and really no downside. Safety, efficacy, risk benefit will get assessed regardless of an attempt perhaps to speed things up. And if it is premature, we'll see that in the data, because instead of approvals being granted within 1 month of the data or the dossier being submitted as complete and being accepted, we may see an extension of that, and we can ask questions and do a lessons learned and see exactly where some of the roadblocks might be. So I do think it's time to potentially expand. And the question is, how do you expand? How quickly and broad do you go to expand? And I think the other imperative I would bring out here really is, you know, going back to the context of Janet's opening remarks, but also the context of where we find ourselves today. The reality is we're talking about precision medicine more and more. We're talking actually about the greatest value really coming from perhaps more complex trial designs as master protocols have become more embedded in the way that we do things. We're talking about, you know, complex statistical analyses to really get to the root of risk benefit. And indeed, we're talking about breakthroughs, perhaps being most valuable as new molecular entities, where patients maybe need a new option. So for me, that all sort of sets the scene in terms of wanting to, as an industry representative, really wanting to say, hey, can we challenge ourselves collectively and collaboratively to figure it out? Because it's not easy. I think once you go into NMEs, there's a lot more to think about, and it starts to really create challenges that we need to work together on. As we heard from our sponsors in the pilots that we've had so far, it's taken front-loading on the company's part, and it's taken sort of a front-loading look, a review, starting that review much sooner. And certainly as you get into CMC and you get into inspections of manufacturing sites and inspections of clinical sites, which can take 3 to 5 months to complete, you've got to think about a new way of doing things.
Yeah, go ahead, Jonathan.
I completely agree, and I echo Karen, the desire and need to expand. I do want to say there is a cost. We, like, you know, our friends in Novartis have new processes, and asking the group to do things twice as fast, it's not a zero-sum game, right? Because they're stretching, they have to spend some personal effort. And I imagine the same from the FDA, right? I'm asking them to complete their review in, rather than 8 months, to do it in 3 months. I mean, that seems to potentially have a cost, and it's not just, you know, you divide and, you know, it's not zero, it's actually exponential cost. So, and so having 2 separate processes is fun, because it's fun for me to say, because it's innovative and thinking new ways of doing things and what we can do differently and more efficiently, so that you can lower the cost a little bit. But there is a cost to do it, to having a parallel process, and then to doing it 2 or 3 times faster than front-loaded for certain function groups.
Great. And then, you know, a company like Merck, a company like Novartis is large global operations, has a lot of resources. I imagine for a smaller company that might outsource a lot of these activities, it would be harder, if not impossible, in some cases, if they weren't coming into the plan with the acceleration in mind. So in the white paper, there's a framework for potentially expanding in the near future to different types of supplemental applications, ones that have a little more complexity to them, whether it's a more complex trial design,
a companion diagnostic, which I would say adds layers of complexity in the analysis, but also potentially in the structures at FDA and even perhaps industry partnerships, or novel endpoint, or different, less straightforward endpoints. And then there's an eye towards them, not as I saw it, a timeline towards getting to those new molecular entity reviews. Karen alluded to actually applying it there. Knowing that Giuseppe at the end of the program there will have to leave a little early, and I swear that's not an editorial comment if he does, I want to start at the end of the line and say, we already heard, I think, the very first presentation, the idea of getting to real-time reviews for new molecular entities as a goal.